Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I'm your host, Timothy Regal. Today, I'm joined by Philipp Tanzer. Philipp is a former award-winning gay porn star who quit the industry and now speaks out against the dangers of porn addiction. He's also a men's rights activist, supporting male equality in the family court system and male victims of domestic violence. He recently ran for Scottish Parliament as a member of the Scottish Family Party, where he advocated for conservative values, reducing fatherless homes, improving sex education, and spoke out against the negative effects of pornography and the LGBT agenda. Thanks for joining me today, Philipp.
It's a pleasure to finally meet a person.
Absolutely. You know, that intro I just gave you, you've had quite the journey in your life. You know, I mean, growing up in Cold War Germany to family tragedy, to the military, to a porn career, and leaving all that behind and getting into activism and politics and finding your faith in the meantime. So how have you made it through all those ups and downs and challenges and changes in your life?
I think the first thing I have to say, I didn't find faith. I was born with knowing God in many ways. That might be hard to explain, but I never felt lost. I felt lost here on earth in some ways, because I feel like I was born separated in some ways from the Father. And I have to say, I did not grow up in a Christian household, but I always had a really strong connection to God, even without having read the Bible. When I started reading the Bible, it was more of a remembering rather than a new discovery. It was like, these are truths. These are truths that I know in my heart to be true. So that is very important to say, because that was a protection that guided me through my life and kept me safe in very unsafe places, I would say, and a compass that kept me on a very dangerous path. And I went obviously I went down some potentially very dangerous paths.
Yeah, and I can certainly understand with that mindset as well, where I certainly wasn't living out my faith and didn't do anything, but I do believe that God was with me through my darkest days. And in some ways, maybe he even, allowed me to go through that because he knew he was refining me for a greater purpose.
I feel exactly the same way. I feel the same way. And it's a difficult topic, because I don't want to say God wanted me to go into these dark places, but I had to go into some of these dark places to actually confirm that what is said in the Bible is correct. So I found too many things, not because of the Bible, but I found them because I felt them to be true in my heart. And then I read the Bible and I was like, that's correct. I could feel it. I could feel it in life. So I feel the same way. God allowed, we have the free will. God allows us to make mistakes. I hope that by me making the mistakes with the protection that I had from God, I maybe can protect others from actually going down this path without the protection.
And now you grew up in Germany. You're German born, and you're old enough to remember divided Germany, Cold War Germany. So what was that like growing up there, and what was, there wasn't a whole lot of religion or faith there. So talk about that a little bit.
So my father is from East Germany. He actually jumped from a ship to escape communist Germany, which could have ended his life. He escaped to West Germany, where he started working as a dentist. That's how and when he met my mother. And I grew up in a good family home. We were well off. We had a beautiful house, a bit on the countryside. And I grew up with my grandparents and with my father and my mother. And I was baptized. So I grew up as a Protestant Christian, but we would only go to church on for Christmas or when somebody baptized or had their confirmation.
Sure.
But overall, it was wholesome. Around the age of 10, though, my mother, she started an affair with a South African weapons dealer, and she ended up leaving the family, which obviously put a lot of stress on the family. And because he was a weapons dealer, and because she was about to destroy her marriage, my grandparents were sending the police after him. So it was a bit of a spy, that part of my life. And in the end, it led to my mother actually being killed by her second husband. He shot her and shot himself afterwards because she was about to leave him, because he was a controlling person, which was what she found attractive about him. My father is a soft person, a soft man. The other guy was a very hard man, which I think that's what my mom was attracted to. But then, because the old political regime in South Africa had stopped the apartheid regime, and he was white and he worked for the apartheid regime, he had lost his political connections. He didn't have a job. He was a loser with a pretty exciting past, but he couldn't even provide for my mother. And that brought out more and more of negative traits in him. And I think really affected his masculinity, which when my mom decided to leave him and to come back to Germany, that pushed him towards shooting my mother and then himself.
Wow. And how old were you when that happened?
16.
You were 16. So that's a very difficult age to lose a parent in any circumstances, let alone, tragically and through homicide. I mean, how did that affect you at that age? I mean, were you already kind of seeing a drift towards some of these other behaviors, some of the, you had gotten involved in kind of the goth community and that sort of thing, or how did that maybe affect that, or did that lead to that? What do you think?
That's a good question. Of course, I cannot say that it didn't affect it, but by the time when my mom was killed, the moment when my mother was killed, obviously I started crying, and then I immediately knew in every negative is something positive, pretty much the yin yang in some ways. And that moment at the age of 16, I was like, what's the positive about the fact that my mom was just killed? And I could immediately see that it could positively affect my life, and that I could learn a lot from this situation. So by that time, I was already very grounded, and I would say, I don't want to boast, but back then I was wise beyond my years and very stable. The goth community and all of this, that goes way back. And I think that my strong connection to God in some ways brought out an interest in dark things.
Okay.
Not evil, but dark things. And when I said earlier that I have this protection so I can go into some of these dark places, they fascinated me. I loved it in art, like some religious painters that painted purgatory and stuff like that. I always found that really, really interesting, looking at the fact that we are dying, that we grow older. To me, there's beauty in all of that.
Sure.
And
God created darkness, God created everything. So he created darkness just as that, and God can be found in anything as well.
Absolutely. And so I think my Gothic phase and all of that has to do with my fascination of weird things of even now, I love taking photos of dead animals. I found a stranded whale on the beach the other day with like the guts hanging out. And I was like, oh, that would be a nice photo. For me, mortality is a beautiful thing. And
Sure.
I think my going into Gothic and being a Marilyn Manson fan and all of that was reflected in that. The question is obviously, when did I start to have a same-sex attraction? I would say in some ways as long as I can remember. I wonder if that has to do with me longing for a father. Because my father, even though he was a good father, he was not a great dad. He wasn't very masculine. He didn't play with us. He wasn't what I needed or what I wanted in a father. And my older brother is gay. He's very soft, also quite soft. So I didn't have that apart from maybe my grandfather. And I think that this urge to find a father, to have strong masculinity in my life, I think that over time, I started fetishizing that. At a very young age, I would say maybe like 6 years or so, I found a stash of porn magazines in our attic, and it was 90% it was Playboy magazines, and there was one Playgirl magazine, and I was immediately focused on that. The other ones didn't interest me. Now, to be honest, I don't think that's unusual, especially for a very young age where you don't have an interest in the opposite sex yet. You're much more interested in your own sex and what masculinity means. And I think having access to this potentially imprinted a pornographic or sexual understanding of my urge for masculinity, if that makes sense.
Okay. So those two separate parts of your life, kind of the homosexual side and the same-sex attraction side, and the goth, kind of the dark side, which kind of maybe even came from not a negative place, but they kind of merged together.
I don't know. I think when you, obviously, Marilyn Manson, Boy George, Prince, and that is actually a good point. So my brother and I, we looked incredibly normal, like we were boring normal, and my mom actually was afraid that we would grow up to become like really boring people. So she bought me and my brother heavy metal t-shirts. I was listening to Roxette, so that ABBA and Roxette when I was a kid. So, and then she bought my brother a t-shirt from Anthrax with an American president with devil horns on it. And for me, she bought a t-shirt of like pentagrams and skulls and devil hands, like pretty satanic actually.
Yeah.
And she gave me that t-shirt and I loved my mom so much. And I was like, thank you. But I was
that's a interesting mom. I mean, when the community I grew up in, my dad was a pastor for 50 years. And I kind of had that exploration of dark things too. I think a lot of kids go through a goth phase. I got into metal music and heavy music and into the hardcore punk rock scene and all of that. And, started getting tattoos and played in metal bands and everything too. And now I guess maybe I'm still a part of it because I'm a funeral director now and I work with the dead every day.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I think some of that death, but yeah, that's interesting that your mom would encourage that for you. Most parents, especially in a Christian communities, at least a lot of American Christian communities, would, you can't listen to Metallica and AC/DC and all these things. They're satanic and terrible, and you can't. And some of them aren't the greatest in the world. I'll give them that. But yeah, that's to push you into that.
The thing is, like, my brother obviously never wore his Anthrax t-shirt because he was interested in that at all. But I was already at a young age. I loved horror movies, horror comics and stuff like that. So I was, that's pretty cool. my mom gave me an old pair of leather, like trousers, leather pants. And I was wearing them to school one day. And then one of my schoolmates, he called me a faggot because of that. And I grabbed him, put him against the wall, and I was like, you will never call me that again. And it was in this moment when I thought, I've got two options now. Either I conform or I don't. And I decided not to conform. And by that time, I became Alice Cooper fan, still huge Alice Cooper fan, who is actually a Christian.
Yeah.
Christian. He's awesome. I love Alice.
Yeah.
And yeah, I became Alice Cooper fan, Prince fan, later Marilyn Manson fan. And I started to dress accordingly. So I was wearing a black skirt to school and stuff like that. And mostly to push myself to see if I can do things against what people expect me to do. And to be honest, I'm eternally grateful for doing that, because I'm not sure I could stand up to government tyranny and all of that right now if it hadn't been for going through these phases in the past.
So at what point did you start, besides dressing that way and acting that way, when did you actually start acting out on these homosexual impulses?
So when I was 18, I dated girls. I had sex with one of them. She was from the Gothic scene, and it was okay, but it didn't feel horny, so to speak. It felt okay, but I didn't feel a deep sexual connection, so to speak. My brother had already come out as gay, and it wasn't a big deal. My father really didn't care. And I identified as asexual with a tendency towards men. I was like, I have a tendency towards men, but I actually don't want sex. I felt quite strongly that sex was nothing that I needed to have, but I was very interested in it. I started going to sex clubs and leather bars and stuff like that, and just observing people, not necessarily having sex, that as well, but I observed people in that environment, again, from a safe distance, sitting in a corner, doing like sketches and drawing things while watching them. And then I joined the military. It's hard to explain. I was simultaneously in different lives. I was in the military life. On the weekends, I would go to gay clubs, but I wasn't part of it. I was just like observing, but I could feel that pull and wanting to engage. And I did engage sexually, but I could tell it felt horny, but not right. It just felt wrong. It took me till the age of 27. All of a sudden, at the age of 27, something in me clicked and said, you can have sex now. And I was actually having dinner with my dad that evening. We were out in a restaurant, and I was like, oh. He was like, what's wrong? And I was like, I think I can have sex now. And my father was like, what? And I explained to him, and then I started like having random sex with random people in the gay community. And I would say 85% of that was meaningless, or maybe 8%. I would say 10% were harmful. It was like, oh, that was bad. That was really bad. And maybe 2 or 3%, I would say, were positive, where I could actually feel that there is a person who respected me and I'm respecting the other person. And shortly after that, I started doing porn. It was predominantly because I ran out of money. I ran out of money from the military. And I was working as an alternative rock DJ, and you don't make any money with that. And because I was German Mr. Leather, the official representative of the German leather and fetish community, as the youngest person ever to be elected or given that title, and somebody who at that time was vegan, which they didn't know. So I wasn't even wearing leather in the beginning of that. And I didn't have sex during that time. I took on this title and I participated in this competition because I felt that God wanted me to. Because there's a lot of darkness in this part of society, and I wanted to go there and tell people to look after themselves and to not take drugs and not screw around without condoms, and to love themselves. And I did what I could. It was limited, and in the end of that year, I was very burnt out, and I had to distance myself from this whole community because it was too much, even with all my protection. And I never took drugs. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. So I was super healthy. I didn't have sex. And when I had something, I always used protection. So I was safe in that regard, but it was too draining. It was literally like fighting with a sword against a flood. But because I was German Mr. Leather, I had some connections to the porn industry. And when I ran out of money and when I felt that internal permission or that thing, you can have sex now, I was like, I could try to go into the porn industry and try to do the same thing that I did with the leather community and try to bring something positive to the porn industry, because I wasn't a huge fan of how sexuality and interpersonal relations were portrayed in pornography. And I was like, maybe I can bring something positive to it, some love, some life.
I'm just curious how that comes about. I mean, is it just something where, you have you're involved with this community, so you have some connections from the Mr. Leather competition. You probably have some name recognition, and that's maybe something they can use. I'm sure they did use once you got into porn, that you had won this competition. So is that something you just call somebody up and say, hey, I want to do this? Is there like a audition type of thing? Like, how does that work?
There is a job application form. Okay. So I went to the website, and there was like, do you want to become a model? And then I filled that out, and it obviously asks you a lot of very explicit questions, what you're into, what you're willing to do. And I pretty much like consistently said, I'm only okay with cuddle sex. So because I had these tattoos, and because I was German Mr. Leather, I was like, I do not want to do any of that stuff. I don't want to be typecast into like
fetish.
I didn't want to do that. And then I talked to them over the phone, and they invited me over to America, and I did my first scene. It was a really positive experience working with this particular company. The boss and all the people behind the scenes were nothing but wonderful people. Were they hurting? Or some of them? Yes. By the time I joined, one of the bosses of the company, who was a porn actor himself in the past, he disappeared the week when I was there, and he was sober for quite a long time, and everybody was like, he disappeared. He probably had a backlash.
Relapse.
Relapse, exactly. And everybody was incredibly worried. And seeing them being so worried was actually quite nice, quite beautiful. And I had the conversation with the studio boss, and he said, look, we actually would like you to work for us as an exclusive. The positive is we will look after you, we will do the promotion, and we will always treat you good, but you will make less money. We will pay you well, but there's only a limited amount of scenes that you can do, because otherwise we
Overexposure.
Exactly. But if you work, so that's when you become an exclusive. If you don't want to become an exclusive, you can work for every studio and you will make a lot more money, but you will probably have a lot of negative experiences and you will burn out quite fast. And I immediately decided to become an exclusive for this company. And I apologized to them because most of the guys and working for them were quite buff and quite muscular. And I said, "Oh, sorry, I'm not very muscular. I'm trying to gain some weight." And he said, if you want to gain some weight, that's absolutely fine. But we like you the way you are. But whatever you do not take any steroids. Do not start taking drugs. Look after yourself. Like, be safe. Yes, I'm against pornography, but I have to say that I met good people there as well.
You've talked about in some other things that I've read that you've written and spoken on about how you've lost some friends that you knew in the industry to suicide, to drugs. There's a lot of drug use in that industry. What is it that happens behind the scenes that's so devastating that leads people down that dark path? And did you ever experience any of that?
So I never took drugs in my whole life. Never took drugs in my life. And it never took me down a dark path, to be honest, because I lived in a small garden house in Germany next to the forest with my dog. And I was working as an alternative rock DJ with real friends. And they were all straight with, like, I had one or two gay friends, but not because they were gay, just because they were good people. And so I was so removed from this gay lifestyle and porn lifestyle. And I didn't really have sex when I was in Germany either. I lived very quiet, very calm. So that kept me safe. What the darkness or the thing that takes people down this dark path, there's a much higher percentage of drug use in the gay community anyways.
Right.
Higher level of risky behavior, unprotected sex, the amount of sex that people have. And people can't love and can't commit. And they're constantly looking for something that is pure, I would say, something that actually fills a hole in their soul. And straight people do that as well, obviously.
Right.
People, like, why do straight people take drugs? Why do they like have various sex partners every weekend? It's the same hole that they have in their heart. I think it's just more common. It might be more common in gay people, and being a sexual deviant obviously opens the doors to just bring all of that. And in heterosexuality, women are the sexual gatekeepers. They set the boundaries. In homosexuality, you don't have that. There are no boundaries because everybody's just like, want to fuck? Yeah, sure. Let's go to the bathroom. It's as simple as that everywhere. And in the porn industry, this behavior gets a price tag. So you start selling your sexuality. And I would say the biggest problem for a lot of porn actors is not the porn itself, especially if they just work for one company. It's starting to work as an escort. When you shoot porn, it's very clinical in many ways. It's like it doesn't feel like real sex. It's the performance of sex. And I often compared it with the movie Jackass. You just do some weird stuff with your body. And the camera is here, and it's very clear you're just colleagues that at the best of times like each other or maybe respect each other. Often you're like, yeah, whatever. I don't have to have a coffee with you after this. But when you work as an escort, and I tried that twice working as an escort, and it burned my soul immediately. And I wasn't even having sex with guys, just online interacting, selling yourself. and people treating you like a piece of meat, saying, I had them pretty much saying, I don't care how you feel during doing that. I pay for you, and I'm going to screw you as long as I want, and I don't care if you're in pain. That's what I pay for. Mm. And I could not believe that. It was a dark time. It was a very dark week in my life with a lot of financial pressure. From one day to the next, I had potentially £50,000 debt. And it wasn't sure yet, but I was freaking out, and I was like, oh, I have to make more money. Now, during that time, I actually was already working as an erotic massage therapist. And when I say erotic massage, it was there was sometimes even full-on sex. Now, people will say that is prostitution, and I would agree with that. But that actually didn't harm me very much on a soul level. But that one day of actually defining myself as a prostitute harmed me so much more. And why is that? The reason was, as a massage therapist, I was constantly in control of the situation. I was the person who offered a service to a person who was lying there. They were not allowed to interact with me. They were just there to pretty much receive, I'm going to say, my care. And I really cared about my clients. So I talked to them about their private life, about how they were doing. And yes, there were these sexual aspects, but because I was in control of the situation, and because I actually cared about my clients as people, it actually didn't harm me on an emotional level, I would say. But when I put myself out as meat, you can't believe how bad that was. How bad that was. And up to this point, up to a certain point, I thought people should be allowed, or it's okay when people work as prostitutes, for example, know what they're doing. Now I'm at a point where I'm like, I don't think you can know what you're doing when you do that.
I've seen the effects of pornography in the porn industry from this side of the screen, and recovered from that in porn and sex addiction, and help other men through that. And I've seen the devastation that it causes in their lives, and see what you mentioned earlier about trying to fill that void in their life. Yeah, I believe it's a God-sized hole in our heart that we're trying to find. A lot of men are searching for God on Pornhub.
Yeah.
And I can see where it can be the same way on the other side of the screen, on the other side of the camera, where they're searching for God and searching for some sort of fulfillment, some sort of connection, intimacy, love, acceptance, all these things. And it just comes out on that side of the camera versus this side of the camera. And in ways, I think that can be even a lot worse because of what you're talking about, where you're just a commodity. You're just, your value is only on what you can do to get other people off. And I think it's even made worse now, the last, I don't know, whatever it's been, 4 or 5 years, because you've had the increase in the homemade pornography industry. OnlyFans, which I call Uber for porn.
Yeah.
Because it's just allowing anybody to do it. So now you have all these, mostly girls probably, but I imagine there's quite a few men doing it as well that are selling themselves on there, and they don't have to even be a part of a porn studio or do multiple shoots. They can do it from their own bedroom, and they're having that same feeling, not even being a part of the industry.
So two things. I think there is a very strong difference between watching porn and providing porn in the God-filled hole that you're filling. Because for the consumer, it's the sexual kick. For the actor, it's the money. It's money, and it becomes the status. You become a star. I was in a relationship with a co-actor, and his star was going down while my star was rising.
Mm-hmm.
And he couldn't deal with it at all. I don't care about stardom at all. And it was hard for me to see that he was envious of what I had and addicted to what I had and
Sure.
didn't care about it at all. And she really wanted to hold on to it.
So is his value, his worth in life based on that status?
Yeah.
And then when it starts going downhill, and maybe that's how some of these people get to those dark places.
Oh yeah.
You know, when your value starts collapsing, it's like, well, I'm not worth any money anymore. No one's willing to pay me. I'm not worth anything anymore.
That's when you get into the escort part. So when you are a well-respected porn actor, you can do escort, but you don't have to because you're still making money. But as you get less and less bookings, you start working as an escort and you burn yourself out. And obviously guys have to eat Viagra like popcorn, which is not great for your heart. And then they have to be fit all the time. So they take steroids, also not good for your heart. And then some, not to be honest, not all of them, but some obviously start taking drugs. I have known quite a lot of porn actors that actually didn't do any drugs. So it's not omnipresent. I would say it's a bit higher than in the gay community overall, but not everybody does it.
We hear a lot these days about the prevalence of sex trafficking in the porn industry. You hear, especially now, all the Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell stuff that's in the news, both here in the States and there in the UK as well. Does that occur amongst men and boys as well, as much as it does with younger girls?
That's a really, really hard question, even for me as a men's rights activist, because human trafficking is more prevalent amongst men than amongst women, but it's mostly for labor.
Okay.
Slave labor. In regards to sex trafficking of boys, I don't know, but I doubt it.
Okay.
I think that the classical route towards boys is through positions of power and trust. The sport coaches, scouts, the church, things like that. I think that the loopholes for abusing boys, they closed them better than for girls in some ways. I think that there was greater institutional abuse of boys, and they cracked down on that quite well. In regards to girls, I don't know how it's about young girls. I know that here in Germany, the UK, the big problem are Eastern European countries. A lot of young girls come over, maybe willingly to work, but then they end up in prostitution.
So how long did you spend in the porn industry? How long was it from when you first joined, where you mentioned that process, to when you decided to leave?
Overall, I would say around about 4 years, but it was very intense 2 years. Then big break where I did almost nothing, and then I did a couple more scenes, and then I stopped it.
Okay. And what led to you leaving it? Was there this watershed moment where you're like, I have to stop this, or was it kind of a fading out?
No, actually, Obama did it. So when Obama cracked down on illegal work in America, he made it much, much harder for people to work without a work permit, including in the porn industry. So my company said, sorry, but we have to lay low. We can't have you here for a while. And that's why my career ended after 2 years. Then when I came back because I was in America anyways. and I thought it's a good way to pay for the travel expenses. Unfortunately, by that time, the company had moved from San Francisco to Vegas. And while there were actually a couple of positive things about San Francisco, they had a really good record store. There was nothing redeeming for me in Vegas. I absolutely loathed it. And the scenes that I had to do when I was in Vegas, one of them was so awful that I would say I agreed to being raped. And the following 3 scenes that I did were much better, but for me it was clear that was the last thing that I would do that. And I felt like I'm so over it. It felt wrong. And by that time I had already, at the age of 32, I started dating women. Having sex with men, I still did it privately every once in a while, but I could feel that it was wrong. It was wrong. It was sinful. It was simply giving in to bodily urges that were hard to control.
Do you think that you maybe deep down always felt it was wrong?
Yeah, I knew all the time. There were 2 instances where I felt a holy presence during having sex with men. And it was not because I was having sex with the man, but it was because there was a real emotional vulnerability between me and this person. Because in both instances, in one instance, the other guy had just been immensely hurt. And there were 2 completely open hearts meeting each other. And well, sex happened as well, but it was the honesty of the hearts interacting. And in the other instance, I was deeply hurt, and the other person was there holding me. And the second instance that I was talking about was actually during a porn shoot. But my heart was so broken and so open, and just having somebody holding me, it was a very intense spiritual feeling. But it wasn't because we had sex with each other. It was because 2 people met each other without masks in some ways. That makes sense?
Yeah. And I think God finds us in those darkest of places. There's I don't know who said it, but it's one of my things that I love to repeat to myself is, and I think it's true of my story, when I was broken and my addiction was exposed. The saying is, you never know that God is all you need until God is all you have. Mm-hmm. And I think we can get into those broken moments of our life where you've tried everything. And maybe that, you can speak to that if that was the case for you, where you were maybe searching for all these years through all these different things. And finally, you've tried almost everything. And you get to this moment where your heart is so broken that you realize God was what you needed all along.
I never felt deeply broken. In this instance, it was, well, I lost a friend, like a friendship. No, he is still alive and we're good friends now.
Yeah.
But I lost a friend, and losing this friend who meant so much to me, that broke my heart, and
wow.
It me so openly wounded. And yeah, it is, again, you're right, it is still the God-sized hole, because the reason why I was so focused on this friend was because I wanted him as a masculine friend in my life, and then he turned away from me. And again, it goes to the father.
Right.
And then there was somebody else holding me. I think I haven't told that in a while, and I almost forgot about it. I was always fighting for myself in my life, and that was fine. My DJ name was Krieger, which means warrior, and I've got a armor tattooed all over my body. But I have wounds to heal, like from birth, from childhood, from separation, from being born here. And I always said to God, I'm happy to fight all my life, and I don't need and I'm happy to fight for you. But at one point, I need a brother who I can trust, who can guard the fireplace while I take off my armor so I can heal my wounds. And that was my demand to God. I said, that's the one thing that I demand, that you allow me to have a brother that I can trust. And that's why I became so obsessed with this one guy who then turned away from me, and why it hurt bad. And then I moved to Scotland, and I started to build my own house over 1.5 years. And I became the man that I needed to look after the child in myself. And now I don't feel that. Now I have brothers, but I actually don't feel they have to look after me anymore. I'm the man that I needed to be, and now I just want to have children.
That example you use is perfect. I love that, of protecting you so that you can take off your armor, because that's what it really takes to heal. We have to break down these walls that we've built around ourselves. We have to open up these wounds that we've been using porn, using sex to medicate with, or running to porn and sex to run away from the pain in those wounds. And we have to feel safe enough. We have to feel vulnerable enough in order to do that, in order to heal. And so It's so important to have those people in our lives, whoever it may be, that allow us to do that. One thing you've talked about in some interviews that I've seen is and I think you have a lot in your now political endeavors as well, is the relationship and the connection between broken homes, absent fathers, broken souls, and homosexuality. What's behind that? What do you mean by that? What do you think that connection is?
I'm gonna put the homosexuality to the side for a moment.
Okay.
I think that every child needs a father and a mother. Not every child can have a father and a mother. If one of them dies, that's horrible. But we know from statistics that in cases where a parent dies, it's actually far less negative from its impact than if one of the parents leaves or can't see the children anymore. That has a far worse impact. I think you need the balance of a father and a mother, and both of them should be fully in their masculinity and femininity, which is also very important. And I think we haven't had that for a very, very long time. I don't know how long the brokenness goes back, definitely to First and Second World War. I think that the fact that so many fathers died, that so many fathers came back broken with immense internal pain, I think that is still trickling down. And unfortunately, we created a society that is so safe now, and that we have the luxury of not working hard on ourselves and on our relationships. And that led to complete destruction of everything that's important. A family, father and mother, is the bare minimum that we need to grow up as halfway intact people. And almost nobody has that. Even in families where the parents are together, how much communication is there? How much love is there? How much do the parents actually teach the children about life? Do they have an infrastructure of people they can trust, a safe community? All of that has been eroded. And I would say that the only way back to that is faith. See it in Muslim countries and Muslim communities. They still have it. They also have problems, but it's very different problems. Right now, both men and women are completely aimless. And this aimlessness also expresses itself in sexuality, in homosexuality, and right now extremely in transsexuality. And when people say that the trans issue is different from the homosexuality issue, because one is like a sexual orientation and the other one is an identity, I call BS. It's a scale where in the middle you are wholly yourself. You are completely comfortable and confident in yourself, in your masculinity or femininity if you're a woman. And then it moves towards being completely out of yourself. Homosexuality is on that part, and the endpoint is transsexuality. There is a reason why a lot of homosexuals also are quite effeminate in their personality. Obviously, you also have homosexuals that try to be very masculine, but often gluing together the broken pieces of your masculinity. But this brokenness that might lead to homosexuality, or the brokenness that comes out of homosexuality. It's hard for me to tell which was there first, the egg or the hen. This can lead to overcompensation, where people try to be as masculine as possible. And in very, very few cases that actually works. But there are cases, I think, where it has created beautiful fruits, where people have overcome their brokenness and now share their experiences. I would say I'm one of these people, where I try to turn the brokenness that I have, and I definitely still have it, and I try to turn that into something positive for society.
I like how you say how the brokenness can be the cause of and the caused by these homosexual feelings in the transgenderism. I think it's a constant searching. There's a constant searching for it, and you just keep going farther and farther down that path or up that scale, like you talked about, and keep searching. And how far is it going to lead? What's the next thing after transgenderism?
Yeah. So I got a question to you, because you work with people that have sex addiction. And I have briefly, so I didn't go through conversion therapy, and I didn't have contact to people that went through conversion therapy during the time when I started opening myself to women. Now, I actually find it hard to talk to people that went through conversion therapy because of their brokenness. I respect them. I fully respect them, but I feel like their brokenness is in parts not dangerous to me, but I don't want to be close to it. I'd rather be closer to wholeness. Does that make sense? And how do you feel about that? Because you work with people that are going through what you've been through.
For me, I don't see it quite in that way. I see it in two different ways. One, it's a constant reminder that I could fail at any moment. I'm only one mouse click away from being right back where these guys are.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. Number two, and I alluded to this earlier, I feel that I went through what I went through because God had a plan for me to be doing this. And I see this as a ministry first. This is my mission field that God has decided for me. And so because of that, I think he has brought me through what I brought me through the darkness and brought me into the light of his grace and forgiveness so that I could have this mission field and minister to other men and help them through the darkness, help them find what they're searching for, help them, let them be vulnerable, like we were talking about earlier. Let me be the one to guard them so that they can feel vulnerable and heal those wounds that are driving this addiction and help them get to where they need to be.
I think I just found the problem. I think the problem for me is that I'm not married yet and I don't have children yet. So that anchor, that thing that ties me, that is the ultimate I arrived, isn't there yet. And I think because of that, I still react negatively to homosexuality. So I have an issue with gay people, not on a personal level, but it irritates me. Like when you were a smoker, you stopped smoking, and now you can smell it everywhere, and you get really angry when somebody smells of smoke, and it's like, calm down. You're only angry because it reminds you of your
own battle. Yeah. Right. Well, you're on the other side of it now, and you can see, you can look back, hindsight's 2020. You can look back and see where those people are. They can't see it yet. And that can be frustrating. I even experienced that. It's just like, man, if you just don't give up, like keep pushing here, you'll get there, because I can see it because I'm on this side of it. A lot of times they can't. And when you don't have that light at the end of the tunnel, it's easy to stay in that darkness.
Yeah. And I find it especially difficult. First of all, I don't feel the need to tell people to move away from their homosexual urges. And it's hard. It's so much easier to tell people, hey, watch less porn or stop watching porn. But if you start saying, hey, have you ever thought about not being gay? You're on very thin ice in regards to like legality.
Wow.
In the UK.
And have you experienced that yourself, since you no longer identify as homosexual? Have you been attacked by the LGBT community?
Oh yeah. I've been attacked from the very first moment. So when I had my first experiences with women again, I was interviewed by a lovely woman. She interviewed me, and I'm a very, very honest and incredibly open person. And we just chatted, and I said, oh yeah, by the way, I just recently had an experience with a woman, and this is what felt great about women. This is what I like about men, and stuff like that. Right after this article, and I didn't even think about it, because for me, it was just like, hey, I'm a person. I'm allowed to have to make choices and to change. And I was immediately attacked, and that I was a traitor, that people like me should die.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. So the backlash was swift, and which made it much easier for me to move away from the LGBT community faster and faster.
Yeah.
And I never felt comfortable with the community anyway. So that was from the very beginning. Never.
And I've seen that even in doing some research in preparation for this interview. I found several articles that were just blasting you online, that were written, homosexual blogs or different communities or whatever. Where do you think that hate comes from? I mean, why are you allowed to, on the one side, if you go from heterosexuality to homosexuality, or male to female or female to male, you're allowed this, oh, we have to accept everybody, and whatever anybody identifies with is okay. And it, and you have to be accepting and believe everyone and all of that. But the minute you switch back, you get immediately turned on. Where does that hate, and where does that come from?
So that hate comes from the very same place where all hate comes from, and that's fear and insecurity. All hate comes from fear, I think. They are afraid of losing their own identity Why do so many gay people and also so many straight people, why do they go into groups? Why do they associate? Even whole Trump thing is like, if that becomes your identity, who are you? Being LGBT is an identity, and then somebody says, "Oh, actually, like you can change your identity." No, you're not, to attack my identity.
So it becomes, you're not just changing your preferences, for lack of a better term. It's not that you're just changing who you are sexually, physically attracted to. It becomes to where it's not even your choice anymore. You're changing your orientation, is attacking their identity, their existence, their value.
Oh yeah, look right now, lesbians are being forced to have sex with transgender women who still have a penis, because otherwise they are transphobic bigots. It's absolutely insane. Their sexuality, preferences, deviancy, whatever you want to call it, has been weaponized and politicized for a very long time. When you look at, for example, Arabic countries. So in Arabic countries, there's a lot of sex going on, a lot of homosexual sex, because they're not allowed to, or access to women is problematic. And I would say a lot of men have contact with their wives and with men sometimes, if they can, if there is a possibility for that. Now, because nobody talks about it, and because everything is hidden, you can kind of do what you want to do without anybody judging, and apart from Allah, because nobody talks about it. And in some ways, they're actually, okay, that might be a completely wrong assessment, but in some ways they might actually be freer than being in the LGBT community. Because if you're in the LGBT community, you are watched, and you are a political representative of your group. Nowadays, it's not enough to be gay. It's not enough to be lowercase gay. You have to be capital gay. You have to be capital trans. It's a political statement. Why do so many gay couples try to adopt? In many, many cases, it's a political statement. It's not, well, first of all, we still have this God-filled hole in our midst because we can't have children. And we are allowed to adopt children, so we're going to adopt children now. In many cases, it's a political statement of equality. It's not about what's best for the child.
Well, that's a great transition. So you got out of the porn industry, you turned away from homosexuality, and got into activism and politics. Yeah. So how did you get started as a men's rights activist?
I think that started when I was in the military. So when I was in the military, most of the other soldiers obviously were straight, were married, had children, and a lot of them lost their children in custody battles. And their wives did parental alienation, alienated their children from them, and it was pretty rough. And because I was gay, you are constantly trained to look for discrimination and hate and stuff like that. But men are being told that they have everything and they are the oppressors and stuff like that. So straight white men can't see that they're being discriminated against. It's a blind spot. It's a complete blind spot. And I could see that there was a lot of discrimination going on. And years later, after I moved to Scotland, and when I realized that I could have a family, my second thought was, so when I realized I could have relationships with women, my first thought was, I can have a family. My second thought was, I don't want to lose my children. Wow. That's awful. That's an awful thought. And that's the thought that drives me till now. So when I meet a woman that I could consider as a partner, I'm like, could this person take away my children? It's like one of my deepest fears in many ways. And that's how I started becoming interested in men's rights. I saw a video on YouTube from a YouTuber called Karen Strawn, Girl Writes What, that's her name. And it was about, the reality between the sexes. And then I attended my first international conference on men's issues in London after watching the movie The Red Pill.
Yeah.
And I think it's the first time that I became part of a movement. Before that, I was never part of any movement. I was always on the sidelines. And now I'm somebody kind of like driving the ship.
Sure. And that fear that you talk about of the way the table is tilted against men in family court and divorce court and all of that, unfortunately, it has caused a lot of men not to get into relationships or have any families to begin with. You see, the red pill movement has gone from, I think, a great place to a lot of times it's gone to a dark place. And you see this, the MGTOW movement, the men going their own way to where they're going to that far extreme where they've just kind of sworn off women altogether. It's some of it because of that fear that you described.
I get them. I don't give up, and I'm now in a situation, and we can talk about that in a moment. I'm now in a situation in my private life that very promising, let's say. But I'm 44 years old now, and I still haven't found, now I think I have, but it took me this long to find a woman that I could trust. And it's hard. It's hard. I get the MGTOW guys. I just don't think it will make you happy. Right. I think it will bring you fulfillment, just like the cat owning 40-year-old feminists that have their glass of red wine on a Saturday night.
Right.
They're not happy.
That's the male version of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And running away from the fear altogether isn't going to fulfill you either. Yeah.
I think that the MGTOW man can be happier than the feminists because they can have brotherhood, and
sure.
Overall man can feel more fulfilled in what they do rather than like having families.
Women are more fulfilled in motherhood.
Yeah. But what does it mean to be a man and have a brotherhood and all of that if you don't have a legacy, if you don't if you have children to protect?
So you got involved with this men's activism. You're active online with it. You went to these conferences. You had your BBC special a couple of years ago, which was great. How did that lead into politics?
So I saw posts from the Scottish Family Party on Facebook. Don't know how I became aware of them. And the party leader, Richard Lucas, he criticized LGBT indoctrination in the school. So I looked it up. I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to have a look at that. And I was like, wow, somebody's actually calling it out, which is very, very unusual. And I thought, I'm going to go to a party meeting. Now I live at the end of nowhere. So the next city is 2.5 hours away. And the party meeting that he had announced was 5 hours away. Wow. So I was driving 5 hours through a snowstorm, a literal snowstorm. I pretty much got stuck in the middle of it. I drove to this party meeting and it didn't happen because LGBT activists had called the hotel to cancel it because of homophobia. Wow. And I arrived. There was let's be honest, nobody was showing up to the party conference or to the meeting anyways, because it was the first time they did that in that city. And it was very early days of the party. And it was just me, the party leader, and one other guy. And we were sitting in the hotel lobby. I went to the concierge and I said, look, I drove 5 hours here for this party meeting. I'm part of the LGBT community, which is actually true. and how can you like cancel a meeting because somebody calls you? What if we were Jewish? If this was a Jewish meeting and some people were calling you saying, oh, don't let these Jews have a meeting, would you cancel it? No, you wouldn't.
Right.
So we went to a bar and had the party meeting there. And from that moment, I thought I have to support them because they need somebody like me with my past on their side, somebody who can actually call out all the stuff that's going on behind closed doors in the LGBT community and in the porn industry, and speak about it with lived experience.
Mm-hmm. So last year, you ran for a seat on Scottish Parliament.
Yeah.
Okay. And you ran as a candidate for the Scottish Family Party.
Yeah.
What was that experience like, being not just being out there online and being an activist online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, but actually, I think, getting in the trenches? I think more men that are part of this manosphere community that you and I are kind of a part of should put some more skin in the game and should get involved like that on the local level. I had a guest on one of my first podcast guests, is a good friend of mine, Michael Foster, who's a pastor. And he has a program that's called County Before Country, where he's like, we need, instead of griping online about Trump and Biden and all these things, it's like, make an impact in your local community first. And so I applaud you for getting involved and putting some skin in the game and actually trying to get involved with that. But that's
my experience in that regard. I live in the most rural area of Scotland. The next village is half an hour away. So canvassing, and it was during COVID, so canvassing is a nightmare. Mm-hmm. I'm a person, I love canvassing. I love going out and talking to people, absolutely love it. And I would have liked doing something in a bigger city, really interacting with people. So some of that experience was lacking, and it just simply couldn't happen. There were some interesting experiences running for the Scottish Family Party. Obviously, a lot of hate from the LGBT community, which was fun because a lot of them didn't know that I used to be gay. Yeah. So they just called me because they knew I was running for the Scottish Family Party, and then I shocked them with some insider knowledge, so to speak. And what my nicest situation running for the party was, I was asked for an interview by a very left-leaning political outlet or outlet, not even political outlet. And they said, oh, can we arrange an interview with you? And I said, yeah, sure, I can come to Inverness, and you send your film crew up to Inverness. They arrived, and they were clearly both non-binary. They came from a Gothic background, and it was very clear that they were sent to evoke a response in some ways. Now, the thing is, I'm a nerd. And I looked at the buttons that they had on their shirts, and I was like, oh, what do you think about their second album? And she was like, oh, I actually don't know the band. That was a gift by a friend. So I pretty much just called her out. And the female non-binary person, she stayed standoffish the whole time, but the guy, he actually, it was awesome. We had a really nice afternoon. He asked me honest questions. He agreed with me on most of these things because I'm a good person and I don't hate immigrants and I don't hate LGBT people. I just want society to heal overall. So we actually had a really nice conversation, and that was probably my nicest situation
experience.
Moment of healing, of reaching out to each other.
Yeah. One of your platforms that you spoke about when you were running for parliament was improving sex education in schools.
Yeah.
So how do you think that we can better teach our kids to warn them of the dangers of porn, the dangers of these sexual deviancy and these things that they're being so obliterated with, really? I mean, it's almost forced on them. It's not that they're being exposed to it, it's that they're being indoctrinated with it.
Yeah.
So what can we do to better educate our kids about that?
I think the parents need to be educated, not the kids, because the parents are the ones who have the greatest access to the children and to their access to the internet. So I think parents need to be taught how to block pornographic web pages on the phones of the children, how to supervise the the content that the children use, and having honest conversations. Obviously, kids know that pornography exists, so you need to have an honest conversation and saying that this is not sexuality, it's fake, and highlighting the harms of it as you are doing. I wouldn't do it. You do it from a Christian perspective in the schools, I think it, and in the homes, I think it should be done from a less Christian or less religious and more scientific perspective, because Christian arguments can easily be dismissed as Christian arguments. But if you show people the data, what it actually does and how much it harms your body and your development, I think these are things that nobody can dismiss. Neither a Christian can put that into his Christian framework, where atheists or other people can put that into their scientific or everyday framework. I think that in sex education, what they really need to stop is gendering everything. For example, making consent something that men have to ask women. It's like, no, you have to respect each other.
Right.
Like there is no place for, a man has to do that to a woman. It's like, no, people have to respect each other. And raising a huge warning in regards to downgrading your sexuality. Now I believe in no sex before marriage, which obviously is easy for me to say because I had lots of sex before marriage, and I wouldn't force my children not to have sex before marriage, but I would talk about it with them. Here in Europe, it's almost impossible to talk about this, to achieve that, because we don't have religion anymore. In America, you have extreme differences between very religious people and completely unreligious people. In Europe, we are practically non-believers. So it's almost impossible to find a partner who says, oh yeah, no sex before marriage. That sounds awesome. It's also almost impossible to find. So when I have children, I would pretty much tell them, well, you might never find a partner because you might make it too difficult for anybody to commit to you. Mm-hmm. But I think the benefits of not having sex before marriage, keeping yourself and your sexuality holy, I think the benefits of that are immense. Now, I know both sides. I had a lot of sex and I moved away from it. And now I see sexuality as something that is completely connected with marriage.
Well, as we wrap up here, I want to give you the opportunity to kind of speak directly to my audience and your audience as well. We've covered a number of different topics here. If someone's listening to this, it resonates with them. They feel like, hey, I'm feeling some of the same way that Philip's feeling. I've been through some of these same experiences. I may be questioning things. What's your message to them?
Real friends, real good friends are crucial. Strong family, strong support of your family. For me, I know that for you, the first thing would be faith, and me as well. But because I always had my faith, it is so normal. It is always felt so protected. But I think that you can't heal without faith. Don't force yourself into faith. Sometimes it takes time, and if you force yourself into something, then it won't work. It won't work. Let your new life, whatever you start now, let it slowly start, and be patient with yourself, and be loving with yourself, but constantly critical. Every day try to be a little bit better than the day before. And I mean, you write about it as well. I mean, there will be setbacks. The important thing is that you don't give up. If you struggle with any kind of addiction, be it porn or be it sex, drugs, I think a very important thing is also that you remove yourself from the place where you are. You have to cut ties with certain friends, with certain environments. But when it's everywhere, when it's all around you, it's so much easier to give in. Build the structures that support you. I guess in your case, it's probably your family, it's your wife, and your faith.
Well, Philip, this has been an incredible conversation. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it. I'm so glad we finally made this happen. People want to find out more about you and what you do and your political activism and everything that you're doing in your life. Where can they go to find out about that?
You can go to Getter at Freedom MRA. So Freedom MRA for men's rights activists, or on Twitter under Philipp Tanzer 1 as number 1. That's the two places where you can find me.
Well, Philip, thanks again for joining me. God bless you and everything that you're doing. Wish you the best.
This was awesome. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon again.
Absolutely. Thank you. This has been an episode of the Into the Wilderness podcast. This is Timothy Riegel. Thank you for listening. For additional content and to learn more about Into the Wilderness, visit www.intothewildernessblog.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and all other social media at Timothy Riegel. TimothyReigle. If you're like me and many other men, you've struggled with porn. I was addicted for over 15 years and thought I would never break free. But through accountability, hard work, and never giving up, I found freedom from porn and sex addiction. If you're fighting the same battle, know there is hope. You can defeat this, but you cannot do it alone. That's why I offer one-on-one coaching to walk beside you in your battle. I'll provide personal guidance, support, and encouragement, and most importantly, accountability to keep you on track and help you reach your goals. So if you're ready to finally quit porn for good, if you're ready to put in the hard work, and if you're ready to finally take control of your life back, click on the link in the show notes to go to www.intothewildernessblog.com or DM me on Twitter or other social media to get started in your path to freedom today.